Basic income is a very simple and very powerful form of welfare. Essentially, the RSA's model of basic income, and there are many others, involves giving every adult around £3,700 per year, unconditionally, with up to £4,200 for each child. These are 2012 prices. A family of three with a child under the age of 5 would receive in the region of £11,000 per year. Universal payment, unconditional. This replaces all tax credits, child benefits and personal tax allowances. When combined with the proposed national living wage, our system aims to help families on low pay at least match their entitlements under universal credit. The overall costs of our system would be somewhere in the region of 1% of GDP in addition to the current system of taxes and benefits. We argue this is affordable. The state will be about 36% of GDP by 2020 under the current government's plans. 37% is hardly scary. Expansion of tax credits in the 2000s cost in excess of 1% of GDP. Discretionary changes made to personal allowances, corporation taxes, inheritance tax and fuel duty by the current Chancellor are well in excess of 1% of GDP, and that's despite austerity. The single-tier pension which is coming in, again, is of a similar sort of quantum. The increase in funding for the NHS is even greater than this 1%. So the change is not unprecedented by any means. We must keep coming back to the question of what types of lives we want our welfare system to support. And this is where basic income becomes really powerful. Essentially, it is a bedrock on which to develop your future. It supports work, as all an individual pays on each extra pound they earn is tax and national insurance, which is 32% on current rate. There's no means-tested taper that can remove up to 80% of additional income, as in the current system. So the incentives to work are strong, not only at lower levels of earning, but across the piece. You don't hit the wall. However, it also supports those who want to learn to improve their prospects. The choices are the individuals and do not have to be justified to an intrusive state bureaucracy, and that bureaucracy, by the way, costs us £5–6 billion a year. Basic income also provides some support for those who wish to set up a business or care for others. In other words, it is a basic building block of security on which to develop your ideas and potential. That's its power. Importantly, basic income is a system that is adapted to the type of economy and society we seem likely to see developing over the next few decades. In a recent speech to the TUC, the Bank of England's chief economist, Andrew Haldane, outlined the risks facing today's workforce. A number of deep trends are beginning to emerge. The very wealthiest are capturing an outsized share of income. Pay and productivity is separated to the detriment of the median worker, and underemployment is becoming endemic. It is difficult to separate the cyclical from the structural, but what we may be seeing, in part, is the impact of new technologies on workers. From the current vantage point, there can be little certainty about the final impacts of these changes. Haldane, using a model developed by Carl Frey and Michael Osborne at the University of Oxford, forecasts that 35% of workers have a high chance of their work becoming automated, and 28% face a medium chance. There's been some sort of sensationalist predictions of tech-induced unemployment on the back of this type of data. The more likely scenario does seem to be that there will be significant underemployment. Fears about automation and work are not new, and we know from history that the job market is dynamic. There is no lump of labour. But new types of work are emerging all the time at both the top and bottom end of the skills range. Many jobs in the middle are disappearing. We can be sure that large numbers will have to adapt to technological change. Indeed, a recent report from the McKinsey Institute concludes, clearly, organisations and government will need new ways of mitigating the human costs, including job losses and economic inequality, associated with the dislocation that takes place as companies separate activities that can be automated from the individuals who currently perform them. If median and low-pay workers continue to suffer, they need a better platform. Basic income is the foundation of that platform, enabling people to retrain, set up a business, and manage unforeseen changes in their working lives. It doesn't disincentivise work, and they don't have to answer for the changes that they're making to any state bureaucracy. At some point, we're going to have to address the lives we want to lead question in the context of the current welfare state, and this welfare state commands neither support nor is it particularly effective. By way of comparison, where we have a real-world example of a basic income system in Alaska, it inspires very widespread support to the extent that the Alaskan system, which pays a basic income to all its citizens, is called the third rail of Alaskan politics. If you touch it, you fry. It's much like the NHS in the British context. So why would the RSA propose such a significant break with the current welfare system? The answer is simple. If people are to pursue creative lives that make a contribution, basic income is peerless. A context of failing welfare, social and technological change make the imperative for change even stronger. It's not the whole answer, but it's the beginning of one. Basic income is a simple system that provides a basic platform on which people can pursue their lives. It underpins freedom and it underpins creativity. And free and creative lives are what we should aim to build our welfare around. We hope you'll join the cause.
Firstly, I want to say that it might seem strange that one of the main forces historically for a basic income has been on the right. Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, libertarian political economists, both were major proponents of a basic income style system. Perhaps one of the reasons why we're able to reconcile this is that we call it a negative income tax. Some people try and say that a negative income tax and basic income aren't a similar system, and I can see why they'd say that. I think there's important rhetorical differences between them. But essentially they're the same thing. With a negative income tax, you withdraw the money that you're giving. With a basic income, you give money in a bulk and withdraw it through taxes. Essentially, those are two ways of achieving the same distributional outcome, although there might be reasons for and against them. So my second point is that a negative income tax is actually more feasible, I think, in our current system. It can bring more people over to its side. There's no need to effectively change the tax system. All you need to do is set up the benefit and withdraw it as people rise up the income scale. My third point is that essentially we have a trilemma here, a problem which you probably can't see, but we can go, you won't be able to read the label certainly, but it's like a triangle. Imagine up here we have shallow withdrawal rate. So we proposed a withdrawal rate of 32%, or the RSA have in their paper. So that's a shallow withdrawal rate. We can get that, and we can get generosity, but that means it's very expensive. And so essentially we have these three things we're looking for. We want a shallow withdrawal rate that doesn't discourage work. We want generosity so that people who are badly off have the incomes they need to live a good life. And we don't want it to cost too much. We can't achieve all three. We have to choose two to achieve. And that's a difficult question. What we need to be realistic about is that most people will not be any better off under this system. But what the real importance of it is to change the way welfare is paid out, the incentives people have to do different things, and the cost of running the system, which brings me on to my fourth point, which is that you can bring the right on side with this issue if you stress the certain benefits you get out of it. So one of those is that to bring the right on side, you need to propose scrapping a lot of benefits to get there. The RSA's proposal scraps quite a few. I would say that you could go a lot further. People tend to think that you should treat the housing system as a different problem to the welfare system. And to some extent that's true, and I think that's a fair thing to do, and they've done this here, and I think there's a reasonable proposal. But it would be better to roll housing benefits in to a higher basic income. We need people to go where opportunities are, and the current housing benefit system and the rental system, that albeit are better than the current system, but it would still be tied to local areas, giving you an incentive to stay where rents are higher. I think that a benefit system should give you the same amount of money, but encouraging you to go where living costs are lower to make the best of that money. And I think that's one of the kinds of things that could bring more people on side if we want to make a political compromise. Which brings me on to my fifth point, which is why do people like me, liberal market type people, favour something like a basic income or negative income tax? And so one of these is distortions like location. I think that a common narrative is that people find that they're worried about having to reapply or losing their benefits if they move to find work or to find just a better life, the creative life that was being talked about. And a negative income tax or a basic income completely loosens that bond and allows you've got your guaranteed income wherever you go. You don't need to reapply. You know how much it will be. There's no uncertainty. The withdrawal is steady. Secondly, it's freer. You have more choice over how you spend your money and how you get your money. You don't have to apply for various different benefits. And the problem with universal credit is, though you don't necessarily need to apply at all stages and it makes it easier for you and it streamlines the process, essentially you haven't really changed anything. You're still trying to make everyone slightly better off under the rules of the previous system, the basic income and negative income tax will be less certain about making everyone as well off as they were before. Finally, there's this point that was very well made before, which is that in the modern world, with technological changes and globalization, this steady, well-paid work, just for technical factors, probably doesn't exist. Now, people can still do lots of valuable things, but they might never have the skills that allow them to earn an income which is enough, by modern standards, gives them a decent living. Now, it's still worthwhile for them to work, but we should top that income up to make sure they can live the lives that we deem acceptable today.
Well, it's already a fascinating debate, and we've got two more people to hear from. So we're going next to the economic commentator, analyst Frances Coppola.
I started writing about basic income about 3 years ago, and I was looking at the future of work, and I was writing about the way in which work in our society is changing, the way in which it's becoming more flexible, what we do is changing, how we do it is changing, and looking at the effects of technology. And the way in which we have historically failed to value certain types of work. There are certain types of work that historically have not been paid. In the future, they may have to be paid. How we value those. And there's this melting pot at the moment, which reminded me hugely of the Industrial Revolution, actually, the previous one, which incidentally was the last time that the United Kingdom experimented with something approaching a basic income. And then got scared and abolished it in favour of workhouses. I think we are pretty much agreed that that wasn't exactly a constructive step. I am concerned that some of the rhetoric I hear at the moment in terms of harshness and conditionality and the moral imperative to work seems to take us back in that direction again, and I don't think it's a road down which we should be going. So I welcome this as an alternative. As I say, let's see if we can find something that actually makes the best use we can of what we might term human capital, because it's not just the individuals concerned who are the richer in their personal lives if they're able to do work that makes the best use of their talents and abilities. Actually, we as a society are way richer, not just in financial terms, but also socially, if people generally are doing work that is to the best of their abilities. And what concerns me hugely about the approach to welfare that we take at the moment is that it basically says any job will do. Well, I'm sorry, any job won't do. And when we have a welfare system that forces people to take any job, regardless of whether it suits their skills and abilities, and regardless of whether it gives them any path at all out of the very low income that they are in, and any ability to make better use of their innate abilities or to learn or to develop those, then we are basically sacrificing the long term for the short term. We are dooming ourselves to a low pay, a low productivity, and really quite stagnant economy, and I don't think that's where we should be. So one of the things that neither Anthony nor Ben brought out was what I would term, you might call a multiplier effect, which is immensely difficult to cost. Whenever we're talking about basic income, everybody always says, oh, it'll be far too expensive. A lot of the models that are produced basically try and say, oh, well, it isn't going to be any more expensive than the current system. You know, RSA has gone a little bit further in saying, well, it is a bit more expensive, but that's worth having. At a pilot level, I think we do have to start there because of people's huge fears about cost at the moment. But if this works, as I think it might, if it enables people to do more productive work, and after all, one of the big issues we have in our economy at the moment is productivity, then actually the long-term effect should be that we are very much better off, and the expense of this becomes lost in the improvements in productivity, in wages, and in national income. And that's something that's, as I said, immensely hard to cost, but just from a theoretical point of view, I think at least should be borne in mind that if we are able to make better use of our human capital as a society through taking a longer term view and supporting people while they train, while they develop their skills, while they look for the right job, not just any job, then not only they, but the whole of society will be the richer for it.
Well, Anthony's done a great job puffing up a great big new idea, and heaven knows we need one, because the adequacy of the benefit system is fast drifting back to where it was in 1997, or I should say the inadequacy of the benefit system and the poverty there. And in some of the main benefits, one thinks of unemployment, JSA, job seekers allowance, is actually going to be lower soon in real terms than it was in 1997, because we're having these years of freezes. And there was a sense in the mid-1990s that Britain was scarred and disfigured by poverty, and as social security is unwound, I think it's going to be similarly disfigured again. And so I think we need to look at any big ideas that can do something about putting this on a firmer footing of legitimacy than it's had during these last few Benefit Street years. Some questions on the technicalities. I'm not going to get into them here. I'm just going to sort of register them. When the social security system that you want to make nice and simple so everyone can understand it and they can understand where they stand in relation to it, always gets a bit snared on things in real life. One thing that's carved out of the system Anthony proposes, some of the disability benefits, I think that's all right. I think that where people are very sick, you could have a separate payment that compensates them for that, and that could just sit on the sidelines. The trickier one is going to be housing, as it has been since Beveridge. Anthony's got some ideas about how you'd address it by localising housing policy, and perhaps then only giving an extra top-up to people who rent, and then you'd withdraw it as their income rises. My own view is that I think you're going to need extra subsidy in London, which then probably will need to be clawed back more quickly than real advocates of a citizen's income would like. I thought that it was great that the report started with this example of someone who is, I think, a trainee nurse who's then told by the job centre, no, you've got to pack that in and go and work at Poundland or whatever it is. It's the kind of horror story that we've all heard either through the media or just through talking to people who are caught in the snare of the benefit system. One thing the report didn't do, but I thought it usefully could do maybe, in terms of giving this thing a kind of academic respectability, is using some of the language of modern microeconomics about asymmetric information, things going wrong because one person knows more about something, normally their own affairs, than the other side does. Now, we're familiar now with terms like moral hazard when someone's selling you a financial product that's a bit dodgy, but I think that there are those sort of issues at play here. If someone's giving you money and then they're taking it off you again because they've decided you're not poor enough, you have got a moral hazard to stay poor. Likewise, if you know that your training is going to be very useful and you can see that it's going to put you on a more secure financial footing for the future, then you're probably in a much better position to make a judgment on whether that's a worthwhile investment in your future than a bureaucrat is at the Job Centre Plus. And so I think actually this goes back to some of these kind of points about why the right might be interested in this. Is actually there's some inefficiencies here that are inescapably related to the fact that the citizen knows more about their circumstances than the bureaucrat does, and so it's maybe better to put the citizen in charge. Finally, let's just talk a little bit about the politics, which are going to be bloody difficult in the UK. They're going to be difficult because 1% of GDP is doable in some senses. Yes, 1%, more than 1% of GDP has been found for the NHS and for tax credits in the recent past. However, lots of things are being squeezed and lots of things are in the queue for wanting the 1% of GDP if and when it becomes available. Yes, pilot first would be a very good idea. Maybe an even better idea to start off in Norway or somewhere where you've got a sovereign wealth fund to play with. But still, I'm enthusiastic about this. I did a book earlier in the year about why, despite the Great Recession, public support for the welfare state appears to have fallen away at just the time when so many people needed it. And I concluded that that was to do with a sort of 2/3, 1/3 division, a them and us division in the way that the welfare state gets talked about. Partly this is about tabloid myths and the idea that there's people who just lie about waiting for the next on the sofa, waiting for the next cheque to come through, and I realise this is what you're up against. There's a bit of that, but there's also a bit of the reality, which is that the old arguments we used to make about risk pooling and risk sharing possibly have less bite than they used to in a more equal society. The sad truth is that there's lots of graduates living in the right parts of town who are not very likely to be made unemployed and are therefore not as interested as they would have been in years gone by in a job seekers allowance type system. So I really do think the politics, if you want to do anything about the poor, do point to finding a new basis for footing the system on. I mean, I start out pragmatic. I don't mind if you do that through social insurance on the one hand, or on the other hand, that you try and go down the rights-based, entitlement-based, citizens' income type route. And I think that the very compelling way in which this report is written makes me think that there might be more mileage in the citizens' income type route than I'd been thinking before, particularly because, and I'll finish with this, I think you can see it playing straight in to the way that Ian Duncan Smith has caricatured a kind of sprawling monster of a welfare system that gets people stuck in its craw kind of thing. There will come a point where he's been in charge for sufficiently long and so many people are poor, and we've moved from means testing to savagely mean testing, and actually all the problems we started out with at the beginning have only got worse, and yet there'll still be this idea of a monstrous system that needs taking on, and this is sufficiently different that I think it might just be able to cut through.